Next up, we're going to have a discussion moderated by Senior Correspondent Pierre Briançon. We have former Swedish Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Carl Bildt and former Belgian Prime Minister Guy Verhofstadt. Please come on stage.
I don't sit here. Thank you for being here in a panel about Europe's growing pains. I'd like, of course, to start asking our panelists what they feel the pains are, and incidentally, whether they think they are actually growing or being addressed. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Verhofstadt. Could you give me, in 3 words, what you think are Europe's 3 main challenges, risks, dangers? Is it the euro crisis? Is it populism? Is it demographics and the immigration problem? Is it the risk of a UK exit? What do you think the 3 main dangers that the European Union faces currently?
3 words.
3 different, yeah. What are the 3 top risks?
That's even less what we can say in the European Parliament, but okay. So I should say recovery, recovery, recovery. That's
the economy is stupid, basically.
The economy is stupid. That's the main thing for the moment. Europe has fallen in a period of stagnation, and to come out of this stagnation is the main issue. Because look to the world. China is growing, India is growing. In the US, they are discussing the fact that there is an overheating of the American economy, that they have to increase interest rates. And we are still struggling with an economic crisis, the fallout of this financial crisis of 2008. And that seems to me the main issue for the coming decade, and how to overcome that by a jump forward in integration of the European Union is, in my opinion, the key issue for the coming years.
So top 3 issues: economy, economy, economy. Do you agree, Carl Bildt, that it's mostly about the economy?
Well, yes, but the 3 words that I would use is complacency, complacency, complacency. That's the risk at the moment. Because we have some sort of weak recovery, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, I don't know what the figure's going to be. And I saw that the Commissioner for Economic Affairs says there's a spring for the European economy. That's not much of a spring, in my opinion. And we have this fairly weak recovery in a situation where we have a weak currency at the moment. We have money for free, delivered by helicopter from the ECB. And we have cheap oil. And we can't produce more. And there's a risk of them saying there is a recovery, that it's complacency. And we are missing the fact that what we need on the European level, Margrethe mentioned that, the crown jewel is the single market, but there's a lot that needs to be done and can be done on the single market that does produce growth. And then, of course, economic reforms, structural reforms on the national level. Spain is doing well due to structural reforms that have been painful, but it pays off. But others are doing somewhat less well.
So I asked for 6 words, and I got 2. I understand the economy, complacency, so let's stay there.
Normally politicians give you very much many words.
Well, exactly.
Words, so we have been rather disciplined.
What's particularly interesting about our guests is that I have 2 former prime ministers. One hails from a country that co-founded the euro, the other from a country that chose not to join.
Well, I was in favor of joining. So
at least for now. That's
I'm
exactly,
not representative of my country.
Although Carl Bildt is also the prime minister who took his country into the European Union in the early 90s. And Guy Verhofstadt, you're one of the longest serving Belgian prime ministers, aren't you? Of post-war period. So how much of the current crisis, pain, is due to the dichotomy, the split between the Eurozone, which is trying to integrate more or less, and the rest of the EU, which is being left. When you're talking about single market, that's a very good question, but isn't that contradictory with the Eurozone trying to build a core Europe by itself?
It could become, and that is of course a major risk that needs to be avoided. But I think so far not. I think we've managed to, or one has managed to, overall, manage the fact that you have the countries going forward with the monetary integration and all of the things associated with that, and the six-packs and the semesters and whatever it's called, and then the rest being partly part of this, but also the single market. But if there were to be a break between the Eurozone and the single market, that would of course be to the detriment of all of us. And the big issues that are now on the table, take the digital, which is going to be discussed somewhat later here. I mean, everyone of course understands that we need to do that on the level of the 28 countries, 500 million people, the largest integrated economy in the world. It is when you get the economies of scale that you really get the growth.
But Guy Verhofstadt, on the reasons for the pain, on the reasons for the current crisis, everyone seems to agree. On what to do, everyone seems to agree. Everyone agrees with a single market, a single capital market now as the next stage.
Economic governance of the Eurozone, that's also common understanding. Yeah. Economic governance.
How come progress is not more?
Well, yeah, that's maybe the point to underline. That in the outside of the European Union, everybody agrees on it. If you see, for example, a report of the OECD or a report of the IMF or a report of the American Treasury, they're all saying, hey, Europeans, do the jump forward in your internal market, to do the jump forward in the integration of your monetary union. And so they know it all. And it's only apparently inside the European Union that we have some doubts about it. But I think that's the true track that we have to follow. That's on the one hand, a new jump forward in the internal market in all these areas that have not been covered by the previous wave launched by Delors. You remember 92, everybody was in the ban of 92. In 92 the world should change, and small and medium companies anticipated even this internal market. It was a big success because we got at that time also a crisis. That was the eurosclerosis at that moment. And with the stagflation and with a number of problems in Europe, and we overcome that by launching the idea of an internal market in 92. And that was the big, I think, progress we made under the law. We need, in fact, a second wave now in those areas, in those sectors that are still not unified. And that's very clear to know. The digital market, the telecom market, the energy market, and the capital markets. I think that are the four, but maybe there are others, but for me that are the four most important ones. And it's clear what is happening. If you look to all the big companies, worldwide technological companies and internet companies, they're all American, are all Asian. Why? Because, yeah, if Spotify, I give a Swedish example now.
It's a good Swedish example.
Nobody knows that it was a Swedish company who went to the United States because they needed 28 authorizations inside the European Union. But it's completely crazy. They went to the US, they developed their Spotify company, and now they come back to Europe. But in the meanwhile, all the jobs are there in the US. The same for energy, the same for capital markets, the same for the telecom markets. All what we are, I'm not doing that, but there are others here, Andrew, Ansip, who is struggling with the council on getting rid of roaming charges, having net neutrality, all things that are natural, accepted already in other parts of the world. And that's the new jump forward we need to make next to solving our economic governance problem in our monetary union, because a monetary union without a political union behind that cannot, in my opinion, work.
You're describing pretty much the program or the platform of the current Commission, all the steps you're mentioning towards a more integrated single market. How come, yet again, that the progress is so slow, and how come governments don't seem to be able to come together? Carl, Bildt.
I don't think there has been, frankly speaking, enough of solid political leadership on the single markets for quite some time. I mean, you can explain that by the fact...
On the part of whom?
On the part of nearly everyone. And I mean, there's a fairly logical explanation for that. Because if you look at the entire period since 2008 to 2010, or whatever we say, it was crisis management that dominated European economic policy making for 4 years. Every single European Council was an emergency, I'm exaggerating slightly, but every single European Council meeting was an emergency meeting. It met on a Friday, it had the crisis solved by the Sunday, and the crisis was back on the Tuesday, and that's the way it worked for 4 years. And there wasn't the attention on the long-term structural issues. Now we are not back to normal, that's why I'm warning against complacency, but we are in a better situation. So we should focus on the long-term things. And it's good that the digital single market is going to be on the table. That's essential. But there's a lot that needs to be done, even on the old 1992 agenda. I agree. It was a fantastic thing. And that, in addition to the fact that we also enlarged it to 100 million people, 10 new countries in Central and Eastern Europe, brought both political stability and increased economic potential, was fantastic. But then we lost touch, and we lost speed, and we lost leadership. We must return to that, because, I mean, there's a European Parliament, you know the place.
Do you think
I'm just
do you think Europe expanded, enlarged?
For just a document they produced a couple of months ago on the cost of non-Europe in the single market. They say between 5 and 8% of GDP could be produced by us doing what we are supposed to do. But it requires political push, leadership and determination.
Do you think part of the difficulty comes from the fact that there are two different economic models in Europe? There's a Northern Europe, German, Dutch, and the Southern
I know,
Europe model?
that's the discussion between Ferguson and Krugman, and between... we
Among
have lost
others.
4 or 5 years of time with this stupid, unproductive discussion. While everybody knows that we need both of them, so that you need fiscal discipline, you need to be on your tough on public finances, otherwise you cannot create growth on the long term, and at the same time you need a growth strategy, an investment strategy, and opening your markets to have that. For 4 or 5 years we have discussed, we have seen on the European level an productive discussion between those who are saying, oh no, fiscal discipline is the most important, and others were saying, no, investment is the most important. When we know, and when the Americans know already a long time, that you need both of them. What have the Americans done after the crisis of 2008? First of all, they have looked to the Swedish model. They have said how the Swedish have emerged from that crisis. First thing to do, solve your banking problem immediately. Don't wait for it. And they launched TARP. And we have discussed 7 years before we had the banking union. Second thing, what they did
But excuse me, they don't have 28 or 17 or 19 countries to take together and to agree.
That's
they
exactly
don't have 28 governments.
That's exactly the point. They don't have 28. In fact, that's the point. Okay, but that can we discuss later on maybe. But I want to make the comparison because the Americans did TARP, recapitalization, closing down the banks. First thing to do in 2008 already, in the middle of a campaign between McCain and Obama. So it was a common understanding. The second thing what they did, the Federal Reserve Board did an operation of quantitative easing in 2009. We do also quantitative easing. When? 7 years later, to avoid deflation. They did it to really have a recovery immediately and sustain. And then the third thing what they did in 2009, within the same 12 months, was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, a program of nearly $800 billion that they launched. So I don't say that we have to copy them, but immediate action after a crisis was needed. I think that the way in Sweden they tackled after their crisis in the 90s the things, that's the way forward. We fall in the trap of Japan. That is what we are doing. And the Swedish track should be a better way to tackle this crisis than the Japanese example of the past.
Carl Bildt, when you look from the outside, was it a mistake for Sweden not to join the euro, you think?
Long term, no question about that. I mean, some economists in Sweden would make the argument that we managed slightly better during the crisis, the fact that we was outside. Long term, structurally, no question. We are heavily integrated, more integrated, as a matter of fact, than some of the euro countries are with the eurozone economy. And we are dependent on it. And then it should be said. I was Prime Minister as well in the early 90s. So I vividly remember the time before the euro. And that was a pure nightmare. There was a devaluation or whatever there was every 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. It was impossible to have coherent economic policy management. So even if we were outside of the euro during the crisis, we did benefit from, sounds strange, but the stability that the euro actually gave in the middle of the crisis. So we did benefit, and then trade-wise, we would benefit from it slightly more. But then I agree with Geir. There has been sort of this academic debate that has been fairly unproductive, and then some of these believed that there were some easy solutions to the economic issues. I mean, the belief that you can solve economic problems by increasing the deficit has been tested in Greece and didn't really work, I understand. Ended up in the most profound mess that we've seen. Most of economic policy is made by the nation states. Europe does the single market and integrate as much as we can. We need to do that. And if we can stabilize currencies both in the euro and around that, fine. But then we have sort of conditions for entrepreneurship, bureaucracy, taxation levels. All of these things are, to a large extent, national. And there I think we can learn a bit of while from the Americans, I agree with that. But we can learn a hell of a lot from each other. If we were to just take the best examples of what has been working in each of the 28 countries during the last 15 years and implement that, we would do wonders. You don't need an American model, you don't need a Swedish model, you can do a number of European models of success. Estonia, with Andres sitting there, for example, did extremely well. Denmark have done good things as well. Even Sweden, a couple of them. No one has been 100% right, but there are lots of good things being done. Take them together, learn from each other, do structural reforms, and then integrate, and then we'll do great.
But how to oblige them? That's the point. Because I was member for a long time of the European Council. We worked a long time on this so-called Lisbon strategy. You remember that?
I remember
and
that.
then the 2020 strategy. And in fact, loose coordination of economic policies is in a monetary union certainly not enough. That's my final conclusion.
That's precisely the point, isn't it? The European Union...
That's printing documents, you know?
The Berlaymont and all national governments are full with reports laying out in detail what is to be done, what should be done. The plans are nice, they're approved by everyone, thinks that's exactly what should be done. How come it's not being done?
At the end of the day, political leadership. I agree. We were sitting in the European Council in all of these documents, and you have sort of 16 points or 26 points or whatever it is, and it loses itself. But at the end of the day, every political leader knows that he or she faces an election and needs to deliver. And then I think we need to learn more from each other. I mean, there should be more, we should spend more time, or they nowadays, should spend more time in the European Council learning from each other. I mean, they should sit down and say, each of them should say, this is the best thing I did, and you should learn from that, and this is the worst thing I've done, and you should avoid that particular mistake, because we've all made mistakes.
I think it's a little bit too optimistic to think that politicians...
You are normally the optimist.
No, I am the optimist normally. I'm by nature an optimist. So
good.
I am an adept of Sir Karl Raimund Popper. So he said that optimism is a moral duty, certainly in politics. Otherwise you cannot survive.
Getting away from the economic matters a little bit, I'd like to know if either one of you thinks that an exit of the United Kingdom from the EU will happen, is a real risk, or do you think eventually it won't happen? Gut feeling or political analysis?
It's a real risk, and it would be a real disaster. I think if you look at public opinion polls in the UK during the last year, it's been moving in, from my point of view, the right direction. But the risk is there. And if it were to happen, first it would be, where Britain would end up, who knows?
Disaster for the UK or for the EU?
Both.
Equally?
Well, what I expect is, we cannot predict naturally the outcome of the British election. But what I think is that let's not have a fear about their request to renegotiate a number of points.
Including renegotiating treaties?
Even that, because we need also to fix a number of these treaties. In another way, when we are talking about economic governance in the Eurozone, we need to fix it, and maybe it can be necessary to change a number of articles of the treaties for that. I take, for example, the energy union. In principle, an energy union is not possible because there is an article in the treaty saying that that energy policies is a national competence, and we have to invent now all types of corporations to solve that problem. So I'm not afraid of it.
including revisiting the free circulation of people?
No, I think what is important is that the basic principles like their participation to the internal market is important. The common foreign policy, I think, because without Britain, the common foreign policy of the Union is not credible worldwide. And then, I think the most critical point in all this is one thing, that is labor mobility. And labor mobility is, I think, also a crucial element in this European Union, because without labor mobility, you don't have a real economic and union.
Carl Bildt, you share that view?
No, I agree completely with that assessment, but I think there are quite a lot of other things that can be done. I mean, the Brits have been saying a couple of things on the single market, which I fundamentally agree with, which is good. They have some reservation on benefit levels and whatever. For migrants and whatever. I mean, I'm quite certain those things can be discussed. No one has said that the European Union, as it is today, is the most perfect creation by God ever. Well, someone might have said it, but very few would believe it. So, of course, there's room for evolution. And the European Union is always work in progress. Nations do have views. Belgium has it, Sweden has it, UK has it. And we've always been fairly receptive to those views.
Very good. Finally, just your seasoned politicians, you have instincts or insights that we poor chaps in the media lack. What do you think will be the outcome of the Greek crisis? Will there be a deal between Greece and the rest of the Eurozone? Or are we going to a serious crisis?
I think we are heading for... I don't have an answer to your first question, whether there will be a deal or not. But I do fear that we are heading to a serious crisis. And I'm more worried by what happens after what everyone is focused on. Because what I see is, on a number of other issues, that the policies of this Greek government is moving in a direction that makes Greece going in that direction of what could even be a failed state. That would be a profound crisis, primarily for Greece. Sorry to say, Europe has isolated itself somewhat from it. So it's not necessarily a crisis for Europe, but a profound crisis that's a risk for Greece.
You agree?
Yeah. Yes, because 2 months after the elections in Greece, more than 2 months after the election in Greece, I didn't see one proposal from the Greek government for real structural reforms in the country. And we can talk about everything with the Greek government, about rescheduling of their debt, about whatsoever scenario, but on one condition, that real structural reforms are put on the table. And until now, I have to tell you, I didn't see one proposal from their side going in that direction. And that is my fear. That
no, and that's a long-term problem with that. Even if you manage to do some sort of quick financial fix.
Yeah. If you don't have this, then...
If everything else goes in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
And Greece goes back to a path that took it to the crisis, then the crisis will be prolonged and deepened. And that's not good.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to stop this conversation, but I want to thank you for taking part in it.
Thank you very much, Verhofstadt and Carl Bildt. Thank you, Pierre.